Well, welcome to this amazing building, the Foundry. For those of you that haven't been here before, we're a centre for social justice and human rights. And we've been open since 2015. I actually work for a small organisation here called Equality's Work. And we've been collaborating with Disability Arts Online for this project. I'll say a tiny bit more about that, but just briefly on housekeeping. The no fire alarm today, but if we do need to evacuate, the marshalling point is just in front of the Lillian Baylis School on the other side of the road and just that way a little bit. And the loos are all at the back of this building on the right-hand side. If you just go that way, you'll see them. And if anyone wants a bit of a quiet space, we've also got a room, which is meeting room 1 just over here. So that's available for anyone that would like that. So just very briefly about our project In the Mix, of which this is part. We managed to get some funding a few years ago to work with Disability Arts Online, and it followed a big exhibition that we had here with 17 different artists, which was very successful. And the project involves sessions, and we've been working arts sessions, and we've been working with a local organisation called Share Community, who work with disabled people and providing arts sessions. And we also do mentoring, and then we're sponsoring these events, which Disability Arts Online are very much leading on, but we support them. So that's our role. We're an interesting little organisation. We've got a website. Do have a look at it when you get a chance. But I'll hand over to DAO. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this Disability in British Art Research Group event. The Disability in British Art Research Group, or DIBA, is led by artist curator Ashok Kumar Mistry and myself, Trish Wheatley, the Chief Executive of Disability Arts Online. Ashok is joining us remotely today, and we'll be feeding in questions from the Zoom chat for those attending online. So as you can see, we have BSL interpretation and auto-generated captions, which hopefully are working for everyone. If you have any more access issues, do speak up, or if you're online, use the chat. This is a relaxed event, so please feel free to move around, get up if you need to, turn camera off if you're on the Zoom. There will be a short 5-minute comfort break at the midway point. So, the basic running order is that we will hear from each of the speakers in turn, and then we'll hold a Q&A with questions from the room and in the Zoom. I'm delighted to welcome Kate Adams from Project Artworks, Melanie Grant from Wellcome Collection, and artist curator Sam Metz. Just to give you a bit of context, the research group is in its 2nd year, and this is the 6th meeting of that group. We have 3 main questions that are aiming to investigate new ways in which we can talk about artwork by disabled artists and increase representation of British disabled artists in the visual arts sector. Our research questions are: 1, what are the different ways in which disability is treated as a subject in the curation of British art? How might revealing different disability narratives create new opportunities for alternative interpretations of art history? And in doing so, how might this lead to increased representation of artists with lived experience of disability? And 3rd, how can we create an accessible curatorial language and framework for understanding and interpreting disability representation in visual art galleries and collections? We are funded and supported by the British Art Network and through our NPO work as an NPO of the Arts Council. We've had some really fascinating discussions from lots of different perspectives in previous meetings, and I'm sure today we'll build on this. All too often, panel discussions focus on the barriers and the negatives and the work still to do, and that is absolutely a valid thing to do. But here, we're interested in going into what's right and how best practice is developing and what the rest of the sector can learn from this. We will aim to discuss how institutions, organisations and artists are working together to improve access and to open up new understandings, and how new forms of non-verbal interpretation impacts the understanding and appreciation of art. I'm very happy to hand over to our first speaker, Kate Adams, MBE. Kate is an artist, advocate and activist. She co-founded and is director and CEO of Project Artworks. Their work takes multiple forms and intersects art and care through national and international collaborations. Their support collective brings together families and paid and unpaid caregivers to share experience and protect rights through training, resources, and advocacy. Through direct, practical, and holistic support, film, events, workshops, and exhibitions, they challenge paradigms of inclusion to increase visibility and representation of neurodiversity in culture and communities. Project Artworks were joint winners of Film London Jarman Award in 2020, shortlisted for the Turner Prize in 2021, and last year represented the UK as one of 15 international artist collectives at Documenta 15 in Kassel in Germany.
Thank you. I'm a white woman with grey hair and a grey top. It's great to be here today, and I am just going to try and keep this to the allotted time I've been given. I've got a lot of slides, so I'm just going to move at speed through some of it. But I just wanted to give you a very brief sense of our first decade. So Project Artworks is 25 years old. It started with a conversation with a painter who I shared a studio with about an exhibition that I'd seen at my son's special school. He has very complex support needs, and there were about 8 children in his class, and I saw a small exhibition of work by his class, and all of the works looked the same. They had no distinctions between them. And so I kind of felt that this was almost a violation of the right of these children to be able to make work. And although I understood that the teachers were doing what they thought we might want to see as parents. So I raised some money and we just went into 2 schools, special schools at the time, worked with 80 children in each school and developed a process of using sensory materials and processes that were very responsive to moments, and taking clay and sand and etching materials and made work with those materials. So this was, what I was interested in is capturing a moment of engagement as a trace of someone's existence at any given time, and also then valuing that as their mark and the profundity of their engagement and their spirit. So we translated, for example, those clay trays that we were using into handmade tiles. So the clay marks that the children had made were made into tiles that were then installed in this new hydrotherapy pool at a level that they could also navigate as a touch form of navigation around that space. We did a lot of work and gradually began to work inside communities as much as possible, in day centres and things, and then show work in the communities where people lived, in public spaces. That below is a small image of the Image Box, which was a Millennium project where we showed films of workshops in people's communities. I mean, this is it in the Millennium Dome. I mean, it just completely disappeared because the Millennium Dome was full of screens. But also we explored with this idea of perspective, of mark making and valuing marks. And this is a large drawing that we did on a school playing field of a special school. Again, this was in 2006, like the NASCO landlines. I wanted to film this, and this was before drones. So we pushed around a blimp. We have a geodesic dome that we take around at that time, and we still have this dome as a workshop space, so we can land it in places. And then we filmed the drawings on the school playing field, and then we walked the line with the children who'd made them. I show you that because it is a sort of background, it's the bedrock to a practice that has evolved, obviously, over time. So the two bookends of the practice are very much the connection, the beauty and intimacy of the connection that happens in the studio, in this creative engagement, sometimes between artist facilitators and people who don't use language, don't have voice or cognitive privilege, and can communicate through being present. And there is a real extraordinary kind of way of working that one has to come into a space with someone and then know when there is a moment to engage. But also, many of the artists makers who we now work with in our studios in Hastings, we work with about 40 neurodivergent artists makers every week, about 300 families and children a year. But generally, the practice has evolved to develop the bodies of work with people who come to the studio and come to us through various routes. This is Sam Smith. He has evolved a practice over about 10 years of working with us. He has a huge body of work now, and he's very interested in the viscosity of materials in the material world in general, liquids and fluids, but also action and sound. So his interaction, as you can see, is really sensory, but he makes paintings that, whilst the sort of aim of the studio sessions for him are not actually to make art, they are to interact with the material world and with process and with others. His images do tend to lend themselves well to, they sit very beautifully within the sort of canon of visual art, and have become incredibly popular in the way that people want to buy them, or that they operate within exhibitions. So I'm just going to run through a very brief exhibition sort of history that doesn't include everything, but it is sort of key moments where we began to be able to persuade through conversation around content of what we were doing, that two galleries, that this was, that they needed to show this, or at least think about how they could better represent neurodivergent communities. And early on, we started with this exhibition. I mean, we had a really, I think for us, in a whole series of collaborations that we've done with institutions, the main thing is you have to have quite an open and risk-taking leader within an institution, because they're very hierarchical. And as long as the top is open, this is an early exhibition. I'm just going to move through it, that was about a body of work that we had made over a decade that explored spaces and the impact of urban and natural spaces on people. And we'd recorded that, and they had recorded that. And this was an exhibition of those works. Then we decided that it'd be great to replicate the studio, because trying to get to enable artists to understand exhibition or want to be there, we thought we could replicate the studio space. So we used Dilston Grove as a site to place a framework that mirrored the studio in which they worked, so that everyone's work was shown in the same orientation as it was as where they worked in the studio. And it was very interesting in the way that the artists owned their own work within that space. Then we had a large retrospective at the Delaware Pavilion, because the Delaware Pavilion has been a friend of ours for a long time, and they trust us. And so we decided just to do a sort of retrospective of some of the work that represented the studio artists that we'd worked with for a long time. And we've accumulated 5,500 physical works over the last 25 years, and have established an archive, which we've digitized, and decided to bring the archive into the exhibition space as a portal into the work itself. So you had to move through the archive. It has a sort of heft and weight, and we've used this now in many different exhibitions. We also make, like the film of Sam in the studio, often we put the film of the studio action and how things are made into exhibition spaces, so that there's a gradual insight from audiences into the artwork, which is the seduction. It's a sort of form of seduction, and then a gradual understanding of the depth of the work and the different stories that sit behind the works. In 2017, we applied to the Arts Council and got 570,000 to run a 3-year project. And then we got some more from the Arts Council 2 years ago. And so we're almost at the end of 5 years of this Explorers project, which was specifically about engaging institutions and finding out from them why people were neurodivergent artists and makers weren't represented within their programs. So one of the things is that many institutions don't really know about disabled people or neurodivergent people living in their communities. And that's because if people don't have voice or cognitive privilege, or have very high support needs, they're often hidden behind institutions themselves. And so we map we started doing this process of mapping around, this is a map around autograph gallery of care agencies and institutions that they needed to know about and could potentially connect with, find out about people and start working with them. And we created, one of the deals of this process of collaboration was that the institution, in this case Autograph, would work creatively in workshops with people from their communities so that they would engage through a creative process with those communities and learn something about them that was very much more human than theory. It's not disability training or access training. It's literally about making contact. This is an exhibition that we did at Tate Liverpool, working with communities. We started to put studios into exhibition spaces next to the work and work with communities to build drawings. This is working on a forest of drawings with people from Liverpool and Merseyside. And then Autograph, who we'd worked with on the early stages of Explorers, offered a solo exhibition to Sharif Prasad, who was one of our artists in our studio, and he had a solo exhibition in 2020. These are his works. He's very into casualty in Holby City, and he likes gangrene. He answers people lots of questions, which is why this exhibition is called Have You Ever Heard? This is an exhibition we had the next year at Ignition, called Ignition at Hastings Contemporary, again beginning to showcase more and more of the archive. At the Turner Prize exhibition we showed the archive again, but put it there with a film inside it. And the purpose of the archive, just showing the sheer volume of work, is to reveal the sort of heft of this, that this is stuff that people have done who are not actually seen as contributors or producers within their communities, and certainly not within institutions. And I think I'm almost out of time, actually. And this is, in Documenta, we worked across 3 spaces. Our principle is always to engage with neurodivergent communities wherever we work, and to engage them and to bring them into these spaces, into the heart of the spaces. We did a lot of drawing with people and workshops within the different venues that we were in Documenta. This is me doing a cosmology drawing of care systems, which we use to support people to understand the systems of the state that can be barriers, but they can also be enablers. And this is our current exhibition at the Baltic in Newcastle Gateshead, and this time we decided, rather than putting a archive structure up, just to get as much of the work out onto the walls as possible. And you can see within the works on the wall is a film of the studios that runs across 3 screens, and it's a real-time video of the people who are involved in making this work, doing it in the space. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kate. That was really fascinating. Thank you. And I'm looking forward to asking you some questions in a bit. So next, we have Melanie Grant, who is a member of the collections development team at Wellcome Collection, which is described as a free museum and library where everyone's experience of health matters. Melanie works holistically across the collections and has extensive experience of building ethical and inclusive models of collecting for museums and libraries that are people-centred and work to place anti-racism and anti-ableism at their core. And we're going to hear more about this now in Melanie's presentation. So over to you, Melanie. Thank you.
Okay, hello everyone. As they said, my name's Mel Grant. I work in collections development. And just to sort of reiterate, Wellcome Collection is a free museum and library where everyone's experience of health matters. And I think it's really helpful actually for me to start sharing a little bit about the collections I work with and how disability is represented in those collections. So you can see what we're trying to do now and how we're trying to push against some of the legacies that we've inherited. So there might be some topics that could be triggering, so please feel free to step out or mute my talk if you feel you need to. So Wellcome Collection gets its name from its founder, Sir Henry Wellcome. He lived from 1853 to 1936, and he was a pharmaceuticals entrepreneur. During his lifetime, Wellcome amassed a collection of over 1 million items that related to the art and science of healing throughout the ages, and the material goes back as far as the 14th century. Now, most of the objects in the collections were actually dispersed to other museums around the world, and they've got quite a complicated history, but we don't really have time to cover that today. But as the collections exist now, they include books, manuscripts, ephemera, zines, audio-visual material, also visual material culture, which includes artworks such as artist books, paintings, drawings, film and photography. And we also hold the archives of individuals and organizations. So for example, we've got the archives from places like asylums and hospitals, where we see many examples of disabled people compelled to live in these institutions, but traces of them only exist from a position of being seen as medical subjects, and they've been marginalized and have no voice of their own. And this positioning of disabled people persists throughout the historical collections. And that's really what we're trying to push against now. So when it comes to contemporary collecting, our collections development policy sets out to prioritize representing lived experience and foregrounding the voices of those that have been historically ignored or marginalized, to try and address those gaps in the collections. And we have a particular focus on deaf, disabled and neurodivergent individuals. So my role, as was mentioned earlier, is to work holistically across the collections. So that means that I research things that we want to represent and where they come through in the world. So I collect contemporary art, but I also collect lots of other things as well, because the representation takes priority over the format. But I am going to talk to you about British art today. So I want to show you some examples of work that's now in the collections, and also how this has changed our practice, because it's not just what we collect, it's how we do it. So the team that I'm part of, we were first formed 7 years ago, and the first collecting initiative I led on was on art and health. And it was through this initiative that we learned how important working with external organizations was going to be to our learning and to our work. So one of those first organizations we worked with was Bethlehem Gallery, that works primarily with artists who've experienced mental health services. And I'm just going to move on. So the first slide I'm showing is a work by the artist David Beals. We acquired most of his artworks to that date, along with his archive. And so on the slide, you can see an image of the painting Liz Brown. It's a digital color painting, and you can see Liz is lying on a bed, and there are 3 women stood next to the bed and a man playing piano to the right. Liz was someone that David met when they were both compelled to live in Stonehouse Hospital until it was closed in the early 90s, and they moved into flats under the UK government's Care in the Community scheme. Sadly, Liz didn't receive the care she needed, and she passed away shortly afterwards. And the work is Liz's imagined wake, where she's surrounded by the mice that she loved and let run free in her flat, and holes in the sky where stars should be to represent her passing. And there's a quote from David that says, "I decided to confront the issue of prejudice against the mentally ill by using informative illustrations and captions to raise awareness of the problems confronting the mentally ill in the community." So David's work sits in opposition to a lot of the kind of sanitized versions of the reality of social care that were held in our collections. So for us, it was a really important acquisition. And when we collected work through Bethlehem, we started to develop an ethical, people-centered model for collecting the work of contemporary artists that was really about being sensitive, about listening and learning, to respect lived experience, a commitment to pay fairly for new work, and pay for the associated labor and travel that we might ask of people, to think really carefully about what we're asking of people and how that impacts on them. We wanted to provide opportunities for individuals to contribute to cataloguing, which meant that people could contribute to how they're described and their work is described. And we didn't want to be competitive, and we wanted to recognize that there's a power dynamic between ourselves and people that we work with. So alongside starting to develop how we worked ethically, we were exploring ways we could give back to the organizations we worked with. So several artists had the opportunity to undertake research at Wellcome Collection, supported by our staff. We also ran a session for artists on how to archive their own collections. And something we wanted to start doing as part of this work was we wanted to commission for the collections, although at this time we didn't have the expertise within the team. But when COVID-19 hit, our director, Melanie Grant, said that we had to commission for the collections and made that a priority. So actually this meant that we could partner with colleagues in other areas of the organisation, such as public programmes, so we could begin commissioning for the collections. So we commissioned 3 artists to make new work responding to the question, how has the public health campaign, Stay at Home, Protect the NHS, Save Lives, disproportionately impacted certain communities and individuals? And we invited critical responses to the campaign and its social, economic and cultural impacts. And we were really keen to understand collaborative strategies of survival, such as community support and self-care. And we prioritised working with chronically ill, disabled and racially minoritized artists who were reflecting on their own experiences. So one of those artists was SOP. SOP explored alternative strategies for self-care during the pandemic through a series of meditative sound works. And as someone in the clinically extremely vulnerable category, they were forced to shield during the pandemic. In the den, they narrate the process of building a secret den in a cemetery at the edges of a wood near where they live. This den provides a space for respite. It's deeply connected with nature. It's a structure of protection and safety in which to shelter. There are actually 3 sound pieces. The first 2 were commissioned by Unlimited and Arts Council England and were acquired for the collections, and then we commissioned a 3rd. And the commission also included several other elements, such as the portable den, which is the image on the slide at the moment, which was made from netting and leaves with sigils drawn on them, and Your Den, which was a pamphlet featuring responses from chronically ill individuals to the Den 1. You can actually access this work through our collections catalogue, and we'll share a link to that for you. But besides the work itself, there were some really crucial lessons learned from the commissioning process that influenced our practice. One was around time. We never put deadlines on the artists to deliver unless they wanted something to work towards to help them plan. And because we were commissioning for collections rather than for exhibition, we had time to do this. For SOP, this allowed them to work to crypt time as opposed to normative time. Crypt time being the concept that disabled and chronically ill and neurodivergent people experience time differently to able-bodied people. And this really enhanced SOP's experience of working with us and also challenged our notions of time and labour and internalised ableism and the trust that we place in each other when we collaborate. And communicating effectively became a really important part of making this all work. Now, having said we didn't commission for exhibition, we did actually manage to exhibit SOP's work. And And when we did that, we made sure it was available online at the same time, because we wanted the people that the work talked about to be able to access the work and not have to come in to an exhibition space in central London. And we're trying to now repeat this with new exhibitions. So as part of the commissioning process, we were also asked to trial a Principles of Working Together document. So colleagues at Wellcome Collection have been developing this, and it's really something to share with collaborators to set out what they can expect from us as an organisation. But it's also a form that is a space for the artist to say what their access requirements are and provide an access rider as well if they have one. Now, we received mixed responses to this form, and something we discussed with the commissioned artists is how triggering any kind of form can be if you've had to fill in endless forms to get support and feel like you've been forced to repeatedly justify your existence. So I think it's important that even if your organisation has something like this, don't feel forced to use it if it's not right in those circumstances. A conversation can be better, and for some people the form did work and it was helpful, but it's really not for everyone. And I think also it can't be seen as static, because things will change over time. And something else that we trialled as part of the commissioning was a wellbeing fund that artists could access at any time during the commission without having to tell us or justify what they wanted to spend it on. So they just had to agree that the funds would be used to support their well-being, and if they had one, the well-being of their team. So we put trust in individuals to use it for what they needed to, without making them jump through hoops or force them to fill in a form, in line with the feedback we got from the Principles of Working Together document. So that has been successful, and we've rolled it out across other teams and activities. And although we don't require people to share how they've used the funds, it's been used for all sorts of things like therapy, medication, gardening, or just having a day off. And we found that giving people examples of what the funds could be used for helped them feel more comfortable with accessing it, and that they wouldn't be judged. And it's important, I think, for those of us working in the sector to recognise that that power dynamic with the institution and the individual can still come into play, even when you've implemented changes like this to help reduce barriers. And sometimes people don't know what might be helpful to their well-being. So it can take some thought and trial and error and working together to figure this out. So now we've got loads more experience of commissioning. It's opened us up to working with teams across Wellcome on new commissions, where they partnered with external organisations. So, for example, we've done recently 2 rounds of commissioning with Unlimited. So we've been working with our Inclusive Collections lead, Helen Wakely, and commissioned 4 disabled artists to produce digital works that respond to the question, how does it feel to encounter materials at Wellcome Collection? So we're going to share some links with you so that you can look at those works online afterwards, because they're all film works, so they need to be kind of sat and watched. But on my slide is a still from one of the works by Christina Vasey. It was called Welcome to Wellcome Collection, and the subtitles at the bottom of the text reads, the empowering moment of seeing a reflection of your own lived experience. So this new work is now part of the collections, and it's also contributing to the ongoing development of a companion to engaging with the collections that will hopefully help reduce negative interactions with the collections by acknowledging the harm that the medicalisation and marginalisation of disabled people can do, and provide practical tools to support well-being and self-care when encountering the collections. And it also helped us in collections development think about what we ask for in terms of accessibility for future commissioning. So all of these works, we have 2 versions, one with a BSL interpreter and subtitles, and one without. We've also been involved in 2 bigger commissions with Unlimited by Christopher Samuels and Dolly Sen. So Christopher Samuels' The Archive of an Unseen is an interactive work showing fragments of the artist's life story, growing up Black, disabled and working class in the 80s, in order to address the imbalance of representation in medical and social archives to build a better understanding of the wider spectrum of experience. As yet, this work isn't in the collections, but our collections development archivist is working with Chris to ensure a legacy for the work. And so the final slide I wanted to show you, this is Dolly Sen. It's an image from a performance that Dolly did called The Wandering Womb, and it's from the series Birdsong from Inobservable Worlds. And Dolly Sen is interested in the disability and madness given to us by the world. And this work explores the challenges and the narrative in existing medical health archives and adds missing voices to the current archives of madness and emphasizes the beauty of human voices suppressed under the auspices of science. And it consists of 3 film performances that are now in the collections, and Dolly's working on a series of accompanying books that will come to us in the future. So there's huge value in commissioning work that addresses gaps in the collections, but it can't just be seen as gap filling. We've got to learn, and we've got to change, and we've got to put disability culture at the heart of all aspects of what we do. To support our staff in collecting and commissioning the work of disabled artists, a few other things that we've found helpful in addition to the organisations and collaborators that I've mentioned so far have been educating our staff. We do loads of training, and Wellcome Collection internally has developed a social justice curriculum where we all kind of learn about anti-racism and we all learn about disability history. It gives us a space to think about language and reflect on what we're doing. We've started creating space within our teams to reflect on what we're doing. We run sessions for artists to introduce our work, demystify our practices. We try not to work in a vacuum and understand intersectionality. Collecting in other areas as well has really heavily influenced our ethical approach. So zines is a really good example of that, and the communities that exist around zines and how they think in an ethical way. And also just seeing good practice across Wellcome Collection. There's been some really amazing publishing on our website, and we'll share some links to an article by Jess Tom, who's also part of Tourette's Hero. We've done quite a lot of work with Tourette's Hero, doing events and also looking at how we display work and our exhibition spaces. Heart and Soul were a resident at Wellcome Collection for a couple of years, and they really champion the talents of people with learning disabilities and autistic people. And we've now, I'm really excited to say, acquired their archive, so that will have a life at Wellcome in the future. So I don't have time to talk about any of the other stuff that we've done, but I want to thank all of the people that have worked with us over the years, because there's loads and loads of people that have had an impact on us that I haven't been able to mention this morning. But what next? Well, we're going to be looking at practices of care, so documenting some of the things we've learned, but also looking at how we care for our staff, looking at trauma-informed practice and how this might enhance our work. And we just generally want to get better at collecting from, collecting with, not from, and letting go of power. Because today I've mainly been talking about targeted collecting and commissioning, but there are other ways that we collect as well. And actually we do invite anyone to contact us if they have existing work or ideas that they want to bring to our attention. And I will just show you our email address, which is where you can get hold of us if you need to. So thank you for listening, and that's everything from me.
Thank you so much, Mel. That was really fascinating. We've come to the point of having a short break. So welcome back. Let's get straight back to our third presentation. And this is from Sam Metz. Sam is an artist and curator based in Hull. As an emerging curator, Sam is influenced by disability-led approaches to interpretation, particularly focusing on sensory modalities of understanding, supported by a research grant from Sustainability Health Environment Department, SHED, and Necessity. As a neurodivergent artist and curator with sensory processing differences, Sam creates work in non-verbal ways that begin and end in movement and embodied interactions without recourse to traditionally privileged verbal and written forms of communication. Their work deliberately sits between learning and engagement and curation. Sam was a nominated recipient of the Henry Moore Foundation Award 2022, and in the same year received the Circa Scholarship for Goldsmiths University MA Arts and Ecology. Sam, who is online, over to you.
I'm Sam. I'm a non-binary white person. I'm in my living room at home. I'm wearing a black t-shirt. I have short blonde hair and a lip piercing. I will just share my presentation. Okay, yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. It's really lovely to be part of this. It's an important conversation. So my work focuses around what I describe as neuroqueering interpretation or legitimizing nonverbal communication. I should probably say is I'm not really a curator. Sorry, A-Shock, I've invoiced already, it's too late. But I am really, I'm just really interested in interpretation, and as Trish helpfully said, I deliberately sit in between kind of education programming and curation, and I work in quite informal ways. So this is my art practice. I make sculptures and video installation that responds to the idea of stimming. I collaborate a lot with other neurodivergent artists. So this is a dancer called Jamal Sterrett, who's a wonderful dancer. I'll just play this quickly. We were working in the studio here. I'd created some drawings that acted as notation, and Jamal is interpreting them with his body. I work with artists that use repetitive actions and stimming actions quite deliberately. I'm particularly interested in placing these within gallery contexts because they're anti-goal orientated, and because I'm not neurodivergent and I work with a lot of neurodivergent people who often work in ways that are not normative and in kind of unprescribed ways of using gallery spaces, which I think is really important, and ways that are very body-led. So from this work, I was supported by Unlimited, already mentioned, a fantastic disability arts commissioner, to create a body of sculpture. And this is one of those sculptures based from my research with Jamal and looking at ideas of twisting of the body. So as an autistic artist and an artist who also has Tourette's, I look at ways of celebrating unpredictable bodies in movement and through sculpture. And this was displayed at the Art House in Wakefield, where I now also have a studio. I was kind of thinking, because I was very lucky to be on a panel with some wonderful specialists who are at great kind of big organizations, and I don't see myself in those terms at all, that perhaps I could share some things that are a little more lo-fi that for me are really important when it comes to accessibility. So I was very lucky to have a lovely exhibition at 87 Gallery, curated by Becky G. And she was really open to me in my own work, using easy read interpretation on the wall space. So this is a really large panel as part of the exhibition. And in previous exhibitions, easy read interpretation would sit within layered interpretation. So it might be something that someone would ask for as a secondary thing. And actually for me, having it as a primary thing means that you're not centering verbal and written interpretation, and you're kind of working in different ways, which I enjoyed. This again is just some interpretation from this same exhibition. So I had some sculptures based around the Humber Estuary near where I live. That large-scale cylindrical sculpture from the beginning that had clay mud tiles in was one of those. And as a simple interpretation tool, I cast these kind of tiles out of jesmonite that connected to the film I had of the Humber Estuary that had these beautiful kind of striations made from movement of water and the movement of sandpipers, which are birds that make lovely feet patterns. And just as another way of reading that film, rather than the written interpretation, I created a little touch story as a really kind of lo-fi addition. I've also been lucky enough to volunteer on some exhibitions. So this was with Pyramid of Arts, which is an art collective based in Leeds that works with learning disabled and neurodivergent artists. And I wanted to create a call out that again, decentralized verbal and written ways of creating work. So this was like an artist brief. And it included sound, color, and I'll just see if I can play it for you, but I might have to stop share and then come out. We'll see how we get on.
This is an artist call out for the Pyramid Open Show 2021. We invite artists working in any discipline, anywhere in the world, to submit work for an online exhibition opening on the 26th of February 2021. We're asking artists to respond to a sensory call out comprised of the colour orange, the word ouch, and the sound of pink noise. The sensory call-out will now play.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to get back to my presentation, which is here. Okay, so that for me was a really exciting way of working, and I was lucky to be, even as a volunteer, with a team that were really open to an unusual way of curating. So on the curation panel with me was another learning disabled artist. And it was really important for me to create a call out for work that meant that everyone could access the brief in a way that didn't privilege reading about kind of extended information about what we were looking for from artists. And the responses that we had were really lovely. So this is a response by Henny Burnett, and you can see kind of the spikiness of it really responds beautifully to the hissing sounds that we had and the color orange, and immediately you can make those really visceral connections because of the sensory call out that we created. And this is by Diana Terry, who I think this will pop up in the visitors, like the online visitors. So that's really nice. And their work connected to the idea of tinnitus and hearing loss, I believe. But you can see immediately how readily it connects to the brief. And I think having a sensory brief allowed us to make kind of more embodied connections to the work. So a lot of my work responds to this notion of stimming as someone who stims myself. So I've got a really quick definition of what stimming is. So stimming is behavior often seen in autistic or neurodivergent children and adults. It can include repetitive actions such as rocking or hand flapping, or making noises. Often stimming is viewed negatively, and that's really important because I try and work against a deficit model of disability. It's seen when an autistic child or adult is overwhelmed by sensory information. And this is the thing that's spoken about less, is that it can also be a positive and part of a sensory seeking journey where the child is responding to interesting sensory stimulus. Something that's very often not spoken about is stimming can be connected to joy. So masking or hiding stimming can be painful, but we're often kind of pressurized in a normative societal way to do that. So I like to provide spaces that encourage stimming within my work. And I wanted to share the work of Clay Bowler, who I was very lucky to collaborate with, and I think they're in your physical audience. So hello, Clay, thank you for this work. We responded to the collection at York Art Gallery with curator Becky G. So Clay made some really gorgeous handling tools that encourage stimming actions as you're viewing the artwork, and encouraging repetitive embodied actions when you're viewing artwork is not only legitimizing stimming, but it's suggesting that stimming is a form of languaging that has an interpretive capacity that's as important as just kind of looking or reading more about the artist or reading more interpretation. So the artworks that Clay made these beautiful tools that responded to were by Wilhelmina Barnes-Graham, Aubrey Williams, and Bridget Riley. And importantly, Clay worked with some really lovely materials, jesmonite, latex, wax. And the reason I think that's important is very often I see museums using really generic kind of sensory stim toys within art galleries, when actually there's so much capacity to relating to the materiality of the artworks themselves through shape, form, material resistance, touch, hapticity, and kind of experimenting with interesting materials. So now there isn't any sound on this, so don't panic if you don't see any sound, hear any sound rather. Okay. So you can see now, I think they're Clay's hands or my hands, just kind of stimming and touching with these handling tools in front of the artworks in the gallery setting. That final one is wax, which for me actually is really gross to touch. So that's something to be aware of, is very often when we talk about stimming, we talk about having like a highly sensitized sensory profile. And some people are like hypo or undersensitive. And it's really important also to have agency with what you invite people to touch, in case people have sensory aversions. Now YouTube is advertising things, so we'll turn that off and return to the presentation. Thank you for your patience. Okay, cool. So where were we? Here. Cool. Yeah. It's going back to there. Sorry. Okay, great. So I'd just like to shout out to David Cleary, who is an amazing curator who works in very disability-led access ways. And we did a project at Mostyn Gallery in North Wales, Llandudno, where I collaborated with an artist group called Elephant. And we wanted to make chairs with backs in the gallery because I have chronic fatigue. And very often you go to art galleries and there's just nowhere to sit comfortably and enjoy and explore the work. And I do have a project called Drawing is Stimming, and I led a stimming workshop, and we created these textiles. Well, I say we, the artist I collaborated with, Sean, I'm like really terrible at sewing. I kind of sewed these onto textiles so that you could kind of touch. There was a kind of a tactile response, a stimming response as you were sitting as well. One thing to note as someone who sits like outside of institutions is make sure you have like good documentation of your work. My documentation, as I put this presentation, is awful. Okay, if you've got funding to get documentation in, I'd really recommend it. I wanted to share this project, which is super current. See, like I've just shared something that I didn't realize it had cardboard in that photo, but there you go, I've shared it now. This is at Nottingham Castle and was supported by curator Tris Ava. This came out of some workshops I did at Wellcome Collection, actually, for Personal Touch by Tourette's Hero, where I collaborated with a dancer, Danny Spooner, and we created little kind of wire sculptures that formed the shape of your stim or your hand movement. So I led participants through a drawing workshop and really to think about stimming, and then how you might kind of monumentalize, it's too grandiose, but kind of make evidence of that trace movement. And so here I've just created a backdrop so that people can hang their own stim shape onto the sculpture, and on top of it is projected like animations of different kind of stimming shapes. These are just the instructions, like how you might want to add your own stim shape on. Thinking about how your hands move, is your movement fast or slow? So I'm really interested in almost there being a grammar of stimming, thinking about your own embodied response and the way that you communicate with the world. This is just a close-up if people are starting to add their own stim shapes. Here you can see. So these will hopefully get filled up over time. I wanted to include this because it's connected to the current exhibition by STEM Cinema, which is an amazing exhibition that I'd really recommend, that really evidences this kind of loop films around stimming, and having an opportunity to kind of view the work and then do something more embodied and physical next to it is really helps with like the frustration I have in galleries about not being able to move, or having to move in prescribed ways, or having to understand kind of the social cues about how you behave in galleries. It's really nice to be able to have an edition that allows a little more physicality. I'm conscious of time, so I have loads more, but maybe I'm be able to share the presentation. So I have some kind of, I'll maybe share one slide, just one slide of the other project as my last thing. Is that okay with everyone?
Yeah, Sam,
Yeah.
that's fine. Just wrap up 1 minute.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, so just the very last thing that I wanted to share is a project I've done recently with Primary, an art centre in Nottingham, with engagement curator Becky G. And just we have created a self-led kit designed by Sean Morrell, where we encourage people to look at the way that they read the building almost as doing a kind of field work that's very sensory led. And through that, this self-led kit, people are going to make their own social story, essentially, looking at the way that they engage with buildings. Okay, cool, that'll do. Thank you so much.
So we are incredibly tight on time. So Kate is actually en route up to the Baltic. So so we're just going to ask Kate one question, and then you're going to have to go because there is a train to catch.
2:30.
For everyone else, I think it would be doing our audience a disservice to just cut it off without any Q&A. So we will stay on a little bit longer. If our interpreters are happy with that, we will talk to you later. So we'll aim to wrap up within the next 15 minutes or so. Okay, so Kate, thank you so much. Your organisation has been amazing at securing high-profile exhibiting opportunities. Do you think that has been a gradual process, or is there a pinpoint moment that you recognise a change in the sector? And kind of what's the general mood of the visual arts sector now? Do you see people being more excited by work by neurodivergent and disabled artists?
Yes, I think so. I think part of the change has happened. There has been a change over the last 5 years, I would say. I think it's partly through encouragement by the Arts Council, who have a very, in terms of publicly funded organisations, have a very sort of, they have a remit and a responsibility to address their communities. So some of the Arts Council strategies have helped to push institutions into a greater sense of needing to be more inclusive. But I think as well for us, we just pushed at the sort of doors of the temples of culture for a long time. You know, it wasn't straightforward. And part of, and now actually we're not so interested in that, as it's actually quite extractive. It's wonderful to do. And one of the reasons for doing it was very much a political rationale because our society values places of culture. So they are places of value within communities. So it was really important to have a presence there for the artists and makers and families and people that we work with. But it comes at a price of possibly not investing so much time into you know, developing the work and also the communities that, you know, and actually new ways of working that support people to live better. But I think it's been a very useful sort of period for us, and it's just something that I think we're just gradually beginning to get commissions. For example, Copenhagen Contemporary are coming to the Baltic to meet us because the show will probably go there in April. And they're fairly sort of spontaneous, you know, invitations that we've never experienced before. I mean, obviously being nominated for the Turner Prize had a big impact, and then being in documentary was very, very interesting, although it was a very grueling, politically charged experience, the whole Document 15 event. But it meant that we did have a sort of global audience, which also helped. So I don't think there's no quick fix, and there wasn't a single moment where something changed. There has just, I mean, we've always worked in the way we've worked, but the context and environment and the politics and, you know, have caught up, I suppose.
Lovely.
Does that answer that?
Yes, absolutely. And there literally is a sort of time limit for you. So if you do need to get up and go, just do that.
Thank you so much.
And
I'm so sorry.
Same goes for the audience as well. If you also need to leave at 2:30, just leave when you need to, basically.
Thank you so much, and
Thank
it's very
you, thank
interesting,
you.
lovely to meet you and to hear you, Sam.
So we'll carry on, and I'm about to ask you a question, but also
you.
project to the back of the room, which feels very strange since we're so close together. But yeah, I'm really interested in the decision-making processes around collecting and commissioning and to some extent exhibiting as well. So sort of what is it that you look for when you're looking to acquire works? And also, kind of, if this is work from a living artist, how do you ensure that the artist gets a fair deal in that process as well?
Yeah. So at the very top level, we have a collections development policy, which is what states at the moment that we're looking to represent lived experience, and that's really our kind of guiding light in what we're doing. But when we are engaging with someone who maybe they've come to us with work that they have, or we've commissioned them, there is a process that all new acquisitions, particularly of art, would go through. And so I would work with the artist or a member of my team, and we would put together a proposal for that work to come into the collections, and that looks at different things like, can we store and care for the work? As part of that, we would be negotiating with the artist around cost, and we've made a really firm commitment to make sure that we're paying for work. So even if an artist comes to us and says they would like to donate to the collections, we always return the offer and say, actually, would you like us to pay for this work? We can't value work ourselves because it's a conflict of interest and we're the buyer. So what we try and do in that case is then support the artist to get advice. Maybe it's from a gallery, maybe they already have connections where they could kind of work with that individual or gallery to get a valuation, and then bring that back to us. If we're asking for things like we want, say, that artist to come into the building for a meeting, we'll offer things like travel costs. If they need to get the tube in, or if they need to take a taxi or something, we'll cover costs like that. And so we really try and make sure that we're not disadvantaging someone by just engaging with us, whether the work ends up coming into the collections or not. Once we put together our proposal, which will also talk about the context of the collections and how the work would sit in the collections. Is it engaging with a particular idea or community, as well as all the kind of practical aspects of looking after the work? We present that at a meeting where anyone at Wellcome can come to that meeting and they can share their opinions, their experience, their knowledge, whatever it might be. They don't have to like have a PhD in that particular subject or anything like that. Anyone can give any opinion within the organization. And then my team will take all of that conversation away and we'll look at the acquisition proposal that we pulled together, and we'll collectively make a decision about what we're actually going to acquire. And we'll also have an idea of what else we're working on at the time. So although proposals aren't in direct competition with each other, we only have a limited amount of resource. So we'll be looking to put our time into things that are gonna really hit our brief at its core. So the things that are really important to what we're doing at that moment in time. Is that everything?
Yeah, I'm sure artists would have got a lot from that. Did you have a follow-up question?
Yeah.
Oh, hold on. We need a microphone so the interpreters can hear what you're saying. But just remember it's not amplified, so if you can project, that's really helpful.
Hello, thank you. Mel, if the collection acquires work, whether it's donated or whatever, is there the opportunity for the artist to have it back on loan for some sort of exhibition or something?
So we do loan work, but usually the way that happens, and there's a page on our website actually which takes you through the process, is that work is usually requested by, say, another gallery or organisation, and then they have to request a minimum of 9 months in advance. So although we do lend back, if if say we bought your work and you were having an exhibition, you knew it was coming up, we would need to know really quite far in advance, and we would facilitate it and we would cover the costs of the loan, but it would mean that it's, we can't respond quickly to it, basically. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
I'm going to come to my question for Sam in a minute, but you had your hand up. Would you like to go first?
Yes, thank you. Melanie, you spoke very, for me, kind of like a light bulb going on when you were talking about supporting people in ways that recognize that people who haven't been supported need to learn what they need to be able to function in that environment or to do their best or whatever it is. And I certainly encountered that myself. As someone who has neurodiversity and complex post-traumatic stress, I also have a number of sort of emotional barriers in the sense of shame-based thinking or low self-esteem, thinking nobody would, my stuff's too personal, nobody's interested in it, or I don't, I can't, I'm locked in a prison sort of thing. And that's part and parcel of the lived experience. And I just wondered if you might say just a little bit about how you would approach artists who do experience that barrier.
Yeah, and there's a lot of, I guess they call them soft skills in a way, that come into a lot of the work that I do, because something that's happened is I've often encountered artists that have come to me with a particular piece of work, but actually it's something else that they've been doing that is much more interesting to us, but they're not bringing that to us because of all the reasons you've just talked about. So we have these kind of exploratory conversations with people to kind of gently tease out what they've been working on, if there are other things that actually might be more kind of pertinent to the collections and the things that we're interested in. But it is something I feel like I've learned over time, and something we're trying to figure out now is, say, if a new member came into the team, those skills that we've learned in kind of having conversations and taking our time and giving people space and saying to people as well, if you want to talk to us in the future and now's not the right time, the door's open, and kind of doing it that way, like how we pass on that knowledge. Because you start to pick up a lot of cues from people when you're working with them, and it's not always easy to pass on that knowledge. But we really want to try and figure out kind of how to do that over the coming year. So it is one of our priorities. But yeah, a lot of it's conversation and communication. And I know that's a bit of a vague answer, but something I'm very aware of is that people often bring the thing to us that's actually not necessarily the most interesting for all those. Yeah. So you have to gently find your way through to get to the really important things. Yeah.
Thanks, that's great, thank you. Coming to Sam now, I want to turn around and face Sam, who's behind me, but the camera's there, so I really should be speaking there. What do you think the potential future is for neurodivergent, sensory-driven exhibition making? Are these approaches, do you think they're significantly different to traditional modes of like selection processes and display?
I do think they're different. I think they're necessarily different because galleries often don't provide safe spaces for neurodivergence. And I think the more that you curate neurodivergent artists, the more that we kind of expand that space for us. What I love about kind of sensory driven work is that it is often kind of not linear. It allows responses that are not prescriptive, and how that often allows kind of neurodivergent, unpredictable bodies space to be without judgment. Because gallery spaces can often have like a perceptual barrier, I suppose. They're normative spaces. They have conditions about the way you should look and behave in them. And I think the more that we program sensory-led work and we offer space that is beyond just sitting quietly and reflecting, that encourages thinking about our bodies in different ways, then the more we open up spaces for interesting work.
Great, thank you. I can see a hand up in the room, and then I'm going to come to Ashok on the Zoom. So,
hi, it's kind of a knowledge sharing, but also asking Sam a question. So one of the things that we haven't covered in terms of sort of this development is increasing the number of deaf, disabled and neurodivergent curators. And this is going to sound like a plug, but I work for Curating for Change. I don't know who in the room has heard of the program, but the name is Curating for Change. That is the website name for anyone interested, which is a program to increase the representation of deaf, disabled and neurodivergent curators who are so egregiously underrepresented in our sector. And I just wondered, Sam, if you'd had any experience of working, you've talked about some great curators. Have you had any experience of encountering deaf, disabled and neurodivergent curators in your work so far?
Yeah, I mean, I have some amazing curators like Aidan Mosby, for instance. I'm aware of the work of Curating for Change, so I followed their work at Thackeray Museum in Leeds, for instance. So yes, I am, but what I'm more often aware of is kind of non-disabled curators kind of taking up that space and curating the work of disabled people, and the difficulties that has in kind of positioning kind of outmoded views of outsider art that can be kind of almost philanthropic in its approach, which is really challenging. So that's why that I really recommend the work of Curating for Change. So thank you for bringing that up.
Partner on this Disability in British Art Research Group, Ashok Kumar Mistry, who, Ashok, I'm going to give you a really difficult job. Can you pick the one question from the chat that you would like to ask?
Oh, great.
We are out of time.
Hi, everyone. Sorry I couldn't join you today. Looking through the chat, there's some fantastic comments on there. One of the questions that does jump out is about the use of the online space within exhibitions and how that it became very prominent during the COVID lockdowns, but as the pandemic is kind of still with us, and you know, many artists, disabled and neurodivergent, still need to shield and still kind of connect in that online space, but you know, those opportunities are diminishing to a greater extent. This question was from Jet, but there's been a number of comments from various people on that subject. So yeah, it's about the online space and the importance of it.
Yeah, great point. Did you have anything to say on that, Mel?
I think the only thing I can really say from Wellcome's point of view is, I mean, because I acquire for the collection, so what we've been doing with things that we've acquired for exhibition is we've been trying to make sure that they're digitized and available online. But that becomes much more complicated when it's all the other stuff that you might have borrowed or it's not been digitized. So that bit I can't really comment on, and it's not my jurisdiction on that bit. But certainly, you know, like we did for SOP's work, when we displayed that, we made sure it was available online, and it still is, and we'll share a link for everyone so you can see that afterwards. With our current exhibition, Genetic Automata, we've done the same thing. We've made the work available online. So where I have a little bit of power and influence, I'll push for it and make it happen. But there are also things that sit outside of my power.
Okay, and also outside of my power is the ability to extend time any further, I'm afraid. So we're going to have to wrap up there. I just want to thank the panel for their fantastic presentations, and thank Mike and Jane from the In the Mix project, Inequalities Work, and Ashok for co-leading this brilliant research group. I have a couple of requests to make. You might be interested that we are rebuilding Disability Arts Online's website at the moment, and we are encouraging people to sign up to our user testing. For non-salaried people, there is a payment. It is a selective process because we don't have tons of cash to give out, but we'll share links to that, and it's on our jobs listings. Also, and this is genuinely not just because it's a requirement of our funding, but Ashok and I are going to be evaluating the programme over the next few weeks before the new year. So we would love it if you could fill in some feedback. We have a link on the chat. We will also email it to you, but we also have some paper versions in the room and a tablet and a QR code if you want to do it on your own phone or device. So please do that. We will read every single one. It's really important to us. Anything on access or the content, we'd love to hear from that. And just a final massive thank you to the team at Disability Arts Online for supporting this. And thank you for your patience with our tech issues. We will learn from this. Yes, thank you.